In Montana, nestled among mist-laden mountains and dense pine forests, lies a lake so clear it is known as the Mirror Lake. Locals whisper that its surface is a veil between two worlds, a place where death never truly ends. They warn that anyone who gazes too long will lose themselves, while, at times, the departed will stare back from below. On nights when the moon is full, the lake glows like glass, reflecting not only what exists above, but also what was never meant to exist at all. Yomi, child. Daniel, a former professor who had devoted his life to philosophy, arrived in Montana with nothing more than an old suitcase and a soul weighed down by grief. The sudden death of his son had carved an emptiness in him that no words or wisdom could mend. He chose Mirror Lake as his refuge, for it was said that the silence there could soothe even the most broken heart. On his first night, he sat at the shore, watching the moon scatter into 1,000 shards of light across the glassy surface. The lake was so still that every small movement of his body reflected back with unnerving clarity. Yet, something in the mirrored eyes staring up at him was not aligned. The reflection lingered a beat too long. Its faint smile faded, though Daniel was certain he had not smiled at all. A lone woman rode past in silence, her silhouette small and fragile against the shroud of fog. The ripples her boat left behind stretched outward, and Daniel saw more than her shadow on the water. For a fleeting moment, there appeared a line of figures standing behind her, motionless, waiting, before dissolving as the waves smoothed over. Daniel shut his eyes, desperate for stillness, but even in darkness, the lake remained carved into his mind. It was not simply water. It was a vast, unyielding mirror, a threshold waiting for something else to step through. Ni Pai Shui. In the days that followed, Daniel returned to the lake every afternoon. Sitting for hours on the shore, his gaze fixed on the crystal-clear water. The light shifted with the passing hours, yet the lake always retained its cold, mirror-like sheen, reflecting every cloud, every tree, every line of his face. And yet, at times, that reflection lagged a beat behind, as though it hesitated before responding. One evening, just as night fell, Daniel saw a figure appear beneath the surface. It was not his own reflection. It was a boy, standing in the still water, eyes wide open, staring upward. Daniel's heart clenched, for in that instant, the figure was achingly familiar. The narrow shoulders, the youthful face, it was his son, the one who had died in a terrible accident the year before. Daniel leaned closer. The surface of the lake remained smooth, lit only by the moon stretched into a blinding white streak. But below, the boy smiled. That smile did not exist in Daniel's last memory of him. It was slow, fixed, as if carved into an invisible sheet of glass. He reached out, touching the water. It was icy, seeping into his bones. Ripples spread outward, distorting the boy's face for a brief moment before it returned whole again. But this time, the boy's lips moved, as if whispering. Daniel heard no sound, yet the ripples against his skin formed a rhythm, like a voice trapped deep in a throat. Across the lake, a boat glided past. The woman who rowed sat motionless, her gaze fixed on Daniel. Her reflection on the water warped, stretched, and pressed close to the boy's image. But beneath the surface, her face was not the same. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow, empty as a winter lake. Daniel turned away, and when he looked back, his son was gone. The following night he returned again. This time, the boy appeared more clearly, as though rising closer to the surface. The moonlight traced his delicate features, but in his eyes lingered a heavy shadow. Daniel realized the small figure was standing in a warped world, a twisted version of the lakeside, where trees bent unnaturally and the sky lay torn apart. Grief and longing bound him in place. He knelt, his gaze locked on the image below. The lake had become a pane of thick glass, one that could shatter with the slightest touch. Every droplet of dew that fell rippled outward, like a door creaking open. And in the dreadful silence of the night, Daniel felt a hand, small and frozen, gently press against the shadow of his own, reaching out from the other side. Dinim, Wawa, Hana, Ha, Amsor. The next night, the wind from the forest blew cold, carrying the damp rot of decayed pine needles. Daniel sat by the lake, his gaze fixed on the still surface. The lake was like a massive pane of glass, reflecting the torn sky and the smudged silver moon. But when he leaned closer, the reflection warped, twisted like a painting in a distorted mirror. In the lake's surface, the pine tree behind him bent like broken bones. The moss-covered rocks became heaps of skulls. And in the midst of that warped scenery, the boy appeared again. His dark eyes shimmered, never leaving Daniel, his mouth opening in silence. Daniel strained to listen. At first, it was only the rustle of wind in his ears, but then an unfamiliar sound rose from the depths of the lake. A call, thin as a thread, stretching into the air, seeping into his chest. It wasn't just an echo. It seemed to come from inside his own ribcage, forcing his heartbeat to follow its rhythm. The surface of the lake trembled faintly, ripples crawling outward, stopping abruptly, as if something below was pounding against the glass, desperate to break through. Daniel trembled, but could not pull away. The moonlight stretched into a sharp streak, like a blade dividing two worlds. The boy raised his hand, the small palm pressing against the surface. Daniel's reflection did the same, but the movements didn't align. The figure in the water reached first, then lagged, then convulsed. The eyes of his reflection were filled with darkness, nothing like his own on the shore. The sound from the lake swelled, becoming a long, hollow drone, like a voice calling through thick glass. Daniel heard his own name, fractured in the endless echo. Each thread of sound tugged at him, promising reunion, promising an escape from grief. On the water's surface, the warped world expanded, spilling into the reflection of the sky. The moon fractured into a broken circle, its light dripping down like molten glass. Figures began to emerge behind the boy, hazy, motionless, their faces empty, yet their eyes all fixed on the shore. Daniel felt the ground beneath him soften. Stones, grass, everything seemed to slide toward the depths. The air thinned into mist, his lungs filled only with the smell of cold water. In that moment, a tiny hand broke through the surface, grasping his wrist. The skin was icy, but the grip so strong it sent blood surging through his veins. Daniel froze, caught between terror and yearning. The sound from the other side turned into a low, resonant whisper, inviting him across, urging him to close the gap between two worlds. And the lake was no longer a mirror. It had become a door, trembling like a thin veil ready to shatter, ready to swallow anyone who dared to look too deep. On the fourth night, Daniel returned to the lake on trembling legs. Moonlight poured down, and the water's surface gleamed like an enormous mirror. So cold it seemed that if he bent just a little closer, his skin would freeze into glass. The wind was still, yet the lake was not calm. It moved slowly, like a breathing creature, each rise sending ripples outward, pulling the darkness into its depth. Daniel looked down. The reflection no longer resembled him. The face in the water was older, its eyes sunken, its mouth stretched wide in a crooked grin. Behind that figure stood dozens of shadowy forms, arranged in a crescent, their hollow eyes fixed ahead. They encircled the boy, not touching, as if awaiting a ritual. The world around the shore began to change. Straight pine trees twisted and split, their hollow trunks peeling like charred skin. The sky cracked apart, stars dragged into streaks of falling light that plunged into the water. Daniel blinked, but the warped world remained, spreading from the reflection and bleeding into reality. He reached out to touch the lake. The surface was no longer cool and clear. It had thickened, viscous like molten glass. The boy pressed closer, his small hand tugging gently. Daniel leaned forward, his whole body weighed down, bones heavy, as if drawn by a magnetic pull below. The whispers rose into a chorus, echoing like an unseen choir. Their invitations wove with the breath of the wind, forming a ceaseless, resonant hymn. Daniel's ears rang, but within the chaos he heard his name distinctly, repeated, rebounding, as though the lake itself was calling him. The ground beneath him gave way. The damp grass softened into patches of cold mud, then dissolved, leaving nothing but water stretching into infinity. He was no longer sitting on the shore, but standing upon a colossal mirror where above and below merged into one. With each step he took, his reflection moved in reverse, lagging, distorting, until it no longer resembled him at all. The boy smiled. It was a rigid smile, like a crack etched across glass, stretching toward his ears. Within the warped reflection, the boy shone brighter than the moon itself, as if he were the center of the lake. The figures around him bowed their heads, leaned toward Daniel, as though welcoming one who had crossed the threshold. Daniel tried to step back, but behind him there was nothing, only the endless expanse of mirrored water. No shore, no ground. The sky above and the lake below blended into an empty void. He cried out, but his voice shattered instantly across the glowing surface, returning as a murmur not his own. A cold wind swept through, and in that instant, the boundary collapsed. The lake cracked apart, not with ripples, but like shattering glass, shards of blinding light scattering into the air. Daniel was pulled downward, his hands clawing helplessly at nothing. His son's image reached out, close enough to touch, but when his fingers closed, he grasped only emptiness. The world twisted, collapsing into a colossal whirlpool of silver, and at its center, the lake had become an open door, devouring the moonlight, and Daniel's soul along with it. Ah! As the silver vortex swallowed his body, Daniel fell into a bottomless expanse. There was no water, no sky, only shattered light drifting around him like fragments of suspended glass. In the emptiness, his heartbeat echoed back at him, merging with an endless murmur. From afar, a figure emerged. It was not his son, nor the faceless silhouettes that had once stood around the lake. The figure was tall, its body sheathed in a dull, translucent shell of glass, shifting with glimmers of liquid light. Its face bore no features, only a flat mask that reflected countless distorted visages, including Daniel's own, repeated, twisted, stretched into fractured smiles. The keeper of the lake moved forward, each step soundless, yet every stride cracked the mirrored ground beneath him, only for it to seal itself again. Around him, pale souls scattered back like mist swept aside by wind. They flickered, writhing, but did not scream. Instead, fragments of their reflections slipped away from their bodies and vanished into the void. Daniel staggered. He realized the boy was no longer there. His son's image had been nothing but a lure, an illusion the lake conjured to draw him across. The truth now stood before him. The keeper of the lake allowed no one to return. A massive hand clad in glass reached out and pressed against his chest. The cold pierced through flesh and bone, and his heartbeat ceased. Daniel looked up and saw himself reflected in the keeper's mask. His face elongating, dissolving into trembling ribbons of light, merging into the creature's body. No gravity, no will remained. Daniel felt his very self unravel, memories splintering and scattering like cracked glass. The image of his son receded, fading like a photograph drained of color, until it disappeared entirely. The keeper stepped back, letting him sink into the whirlpool of reflections. Daniel was no longer the lost wanderer. He had become one of the silent figures that once stood around the boy. His eyes were empty, his body transparent as a frozen lake in winter. Above, the surface sealed itself, smooth as though it had never stirred. Moonlight slid across, reflecting the night sky in flawless silence. On the shore, the woman in the boat dipped her oar, and the vessel drifted through the thickening fog. For just a moment, her eyes tilted toward the lake, where a new shadow had joined the endless ranks of those who would never be freed. And from that night on, Daniel never returned to the shore. Azimu. Deep in the heart of Florida, hidden among ancient palms and choking weeds, lies an amusement park abandoned for decades. Every ride has rotted away, swallowed by time, except for one. A wooden carousel still turns in silence, never ceasing, its painted horses frozen in a grotesque parade. From its rusted speakers drifts a warped lullaby, carried on the night wind like a sinister cradle song. Locals whisper that anyone who lingers near the carousel after sundown will be pulled into a ride with no end, vanishing from the world as if they had never been. Helen pushed through the rusted iron gate, her hands trembling as her fingers brushed against the cold bars, still damp with lingering dew. Inside, the amusement park stretched before her like a graveyard of memories. Helen walked slowly down cracked cement paths, where once bright cartoon murals had dissolved into grotesque stains. The characters' eyes had peeled away, leaving behind black hollows that seemed to watch her. Each step felt like pressing deeper into a forgotten past, a place of memory that did not wish to be disturbed. In the distance, she saw it, the carousel, the only thing untouched. Its canopy was mottled with rust, glass bulbs shattered long ago, yet the platform seemed to radiate a strange allure. The horses stood frozen, their paint flaked and withered, but the wooden saddles gleamed as though someone had only just ridden them. Helen halted, her heartbeat quickening. There was no breeze, yet the faded fabric streamers hanging from the roof stirred faintly, as if the carousel had sighed. Childhood memories surged. Days long gone when she had ridden those horses, laughter in the air, the cheerful music lifting her as if the whole sky spun along with her joy. But now, those recollections were draped in dust and shadow, distorted like a dream, unraveling into nightmare. She could not say why she had returned, only that a formless compulsion had drawn her here, an invisible thread pulling each step tighter. Moonlight spilled slantwise across the ride, painting the horses in a pale, sickly glow. Every one of them bowed their heads, mouths parted as though ready to shriek, but they remained silent, suffocatingly still. Helen froze. She felt it, the unmistakable sense of something watching from the dark that encircled the carousel. Somewhere nearby, a drop of metal rang out, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed into the night. Helen knew then she had stepped across a boundary, one that should never have been awakened. Wah-rah! Helen remained rooted before the carousel. The air pressed down like a suffocating shroud, her breaths shallow and uneven. Then it came, a faint sound, weak and jagged, like a saw blade scraping against metal. Suddenly, the silence collapsed, and the air swelled with music. The familiar tune of the carousel, once playful and bright, now shattered and twisted into something monstrous. The melody screamed through corroded speakers, turning childhood joy into a lullaby for the dark. The rhythm faltered, stuttering between frantic bursts and sluggish lulls, as though the entire machine were gasping for its last breath, yet refusing to die. Each note dripped into the air like damp rot, soaking the night in decay. Helen glanced around in alarm, but the park lay deathly still. The other rides were swallowed by darkness, unmoving, while only the carousel glimmered faintly, its broken bulbs flickering with a pale fish-eye glow. Beneath the horses' hooves, the wooden platform shuddered, creaking like bones grinding together. The horses themselves had not moved, yet Helen noticed a change. Their peeling paint seemed darker, as if slick with something oozing from within. Thin cracks along their bodies widened slightly, leaking a faint glow that pulsed like the breath of rotting lungs. A chill ripped down Helen's spine as she realized the warped tune was not coming only from the speakers. It seeped from the ride itself, from the horses' half-open mouths, from the chains that rattled in rhythm. The music faltered, dipping low, dragging out like the ragged exhale of something hidden. The atmosphere around her grew heavier, like standing inside an abandoned cathedral where the hymn had curdled into a prayer for shadows. Then, a wind stirred. Dry leaves skittered around her feet, though the breeze did not come from outside. It swelled from the carousel's heart, from the black hollow at its center. The music fused with the wind, becoming a long and unearthly howl that rippled across the ruins of the park. Helen wrapped her arms around herself, eyes locked on the wooden steeds. For an instant, she could swear one of their mouths curved upward, splitting to reveal cracked wooden teeth poised to laugh. The tune surged suddenly higher, frenzied, and the carousel shook violently, shedding flakes of rust that rained down like metallic dust. There was no mistaking it now. The rusted carousel had awakened, and Helen knew she was no longer a mere spectator. Wahaha. The warped music swelled, reverberating through the abandoned park like a funeral bell summoning the lost. Helen stood frozen, her gaze locked on the carousel. The wooden horses, motionless for so long, began to tremble. At first, it seemed no more than a trick of flickering light, but then the movements sharpened, undeniable. Their heads lifted, stiff necks creaking with the brittle crack of splintering bone. From the outer rim, one horse jerked as flakes of paint sloughed off in sheets, exposing the dark grain beneath. Its carved mouth, sealed shut for decades, split along deepening fissures, yawning open into a black void. A breath colder than winter exhaled from it, bending the grass around the platform. Helen staggered back, yet her eyes were caught, trapped. One by one, the horses opened their eyes. Where once black paint had merely suggested sight, now pale light oozed forth, murky, fish-belly white, unblinking. It did not illuminate, but devoured, pulling shadows inward until a fog of darkness thickened around the ride. The music shifted, pounding now with the cadence of a funeral drum. The horses raised their hooves, at first only inches, then higher, moving in slow, grotesque steps. The rusted gears screamed as the carousel lurched, teeth grinding, sparking against one another. The wooden floor quaked, dust cascading like dry rain. Helen could see every grotesque detail, hooves slamming down, leaving dents in the planks, tangled wooden manes rippling as if strands of real hair, and from the widening cracks in their bodies, thick black ichor seeping, dribbling down to stain the platform like rotted blood. The carousel gathered speed. The twisted tune fractured into shrill, howling dissonance. Helen felt the ground itself vibrating, as though the entire park had joined in rhythm with this monstrous machine. The horses moved with uncanny freedom now, heads reared high, glowing eyes slicing through the dark as if searching for something or someone. One horse lifted its head higher than the rest, its chest heaving in a grotesque imitation of breath. Then its hoof struck the floor with a thunderous blow. The sound rang like a death knell, freezing Helen's heart in her chest. She could no longer tell where wood ended and flesh began. Splintered grain coiled like sinew, rigid joints popped like dry bones. The once polished saddles bore scratches and gouges, yet remained empty, waiting for some foolish soul to mount them. A whirlwind burst from the carousel, hurling leaves and grit into a swirling frenzy around Helen. The music climbed higher, shrieking, while shattered bulbs flared in a blinding glare. Within the storm, Helen glimpsed something in the horse's eyes. Her own reflection, small and fragile, dragged toward the turning wheel. She tried to move, but her body was stone. Her legs were anchored, refusing her escape. With every rotation, the carousel seemed to draw closer, as though space itself was collapsing inward, funneling everything into its rusted heart. The music struck a shattering peak. The cracked mirrors dangling from the canopy shivered violently, their surfaces splintering. For a single instant, Helen saw dozens of her own reflections, everyone wide-eyed with identical terror, surrounded by the wooden steeds rising into unnatural light. The rusted carousel had truly awakened. And Helen understood, this time, it would never let her leave. The dissonant music coiled through the abandoned park, tightening the air like an invisible rope cinched around Helen's throat. The carousel groaned as it turned, each rotation dragging with it a metallic wail. Then she noticed them, the old mirrors still clinging to the carousel's canopy after years of ruin. Their glass was fractured, edges jagged, yet they reflected something far too vividly. Helen stepped back, but in the mirrors, her reflections did not follow. Dozens of distorted Helens stood motionless, their eyes wide, fixed on her with hollow stares. In some panes, she appeared older, hair bleached white, falling in tangled sheets. In others, she was young again, her face blank, eyes black and bottomless. Cracks crawled across the glass like spider webs, branching wider each time the warped melody struck a high note. Each shatter split her reflections into fragments, yet they moved still, shifting, twitching, watching. One shard showed only a hand, trembling, reaching toward her. Another held a single blood-red eye, staring unblinking, suspended in its prison. Pain tightened around her skull, as though her own head were cracking with the glass. Within the mirrors, some of her reflections began to move against her. When she stepped back, they stepped forward, their pace quickening, their dead eyes locked to her flesh. The distorted music throbbed with her heartbeat, merging into a relentless drum. A sharp crack split the air. One mirror exploded outward, scattering into a storm of jagged shards. Instead of falling, the pieces hovered, spinning in a slow orbit around her, catching faint, unnatural light. In each shard, another Helen appeared. One screamed silently, another sneered, yet another crawled on all fours like an animal, its body twisted into something no longer human. The carousel turned, the horses' glowing eyes flaring brighter, casting their radiance onto the mirrors. The glass burned with strange illumination, like portals rather than mere reflections. And Helen realized these were not copies. They were possibilities, imprisoned selves, fragments of her soul caught within the glass. Each version pounded against the barrier, desperate to escape. The canopy trembled, and more mirrors split. Shrill screams pierced the air, uncertain whether from the mirrors or from within her own mind. The world shattered into a labyrinth of fractured light, where reflection and reality bled together. Wherever she turned, dozens of vacant eyes followed, denying her any path of escape. One large mirror ahead blazed with sudden brightness. Inside, Helen saw herself seated upon a wooden horse, her body rigid, her eyes wide and lifeless. The reflection slowly lifted its head to meet her gaze, and then its mouth cracked open in a jagged grin. The fissure in the glass aligned with its lips, stretching into a grotesque wound across its face. The warped melody erupted, and every mirror shuddered as though ready to burst apart. Helen was surrounded, trapped within a kaleidoscope of her own distorted selves, each one a death waiting to claim her. And she understood. The carousel did not merely consume bodies in its endless turning. It tore the soul into fragments, locking each piece within the warped reflection of fear itself. Now, ici, wa. The iron gates of the park groaned, then slammed shut. The impact rang out like a coffin, sealed with a hammer's blow. Helen turned, but the way back was gone, swallowed by a suffocating wall of dark. She knew then there would be no return. The rusted carousel kept turning, faster with each revolution, its warped dirge swelling into a frenzied funeral march. The wooden horses no longer moved in stiff, fragmented jerks. They thundered in unison, galloping with terrifying force, their pale, blind eyes blazing like will-o'-the-wisps. Wooden manes whipped as if caught in a storm, while their cracked mouths exhaled freezing breaths that rolled into a suffocating fog. Helen felt her body pulled taut, dragged by an unseen gravity, as though the earth itself tilted toward the spinning core. She clawed at the rotted planks beneath her, but the wood softened under her fingers, crumbling to slick mud. The world tilted, the shards of shattered mirrors whirling into a silver firestorm around her, orbiting like lunatic planets. One horse lifted its head, its glowing stare seizing her. Her limbs locked, marionette-like, lifting of their own accord. Step by step she walked toward the ride, her will dissolved. At the rusted stair, her trembling hand brushed the railing. The chill of corroded iron clung to her skin, draining what warmth remained. On the carousel's floor, the saddles gleamed slick with the black ichor seeping from cracked wooden flanks. Helen saw impressions embedded into the seats, indentations of unseen riders pressed deep into the wood. The music screamed as she drew closer, until she stopped before one horse split with fissures, its body streaked with stains of darkness. It lowered its head, waiting. She could not resist. Her body leaned forward, hand gripping the saddle. As she sat, agony shot through her spine, spreading in iron chains that hooked into her flesh, binding her to the horse. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only a plume of pale breath fading into the mist. The carousel surged. The horses lunged forward, straining against their wooden track, yet bound eternally to their orbit. With each rotation, Helen saw her reflection in the broken mirrors. Not one, but dozens, hundreds of Helens. Some wept. Some grinned with teeth bared. Others crumbled into ash. All of them circled endlessly, prisoners of a ride with no escape. The melody shattered into howls that drowned even the wind. The whole park quaked, yet the carousel remained unmoved, spinning like the rotted heart of the place. Helen saw where the gates had once stood, now vanished, replaced by a void without sky, without ground, only a spiraling abyss drawn into the ride's relentless rhythm. As her vision dimmed, she glimpsed others riding beside her. A boy slumped on his mount, his face blurred into shadow. An old mechanic, his steel-bound hands fused to the saddle. Silent passengers, trapped in the same eternal circuit, revolved with her through endless night. And then Helen understood. The carousel never stops. It is a colossal mill, grinding time itself into dust, tearing souls into fragments, binding them forever to its orbit. The warped music dissolved into darkness. The wooden horses galloped on, their blind eyes blazing, and Helen, now just one shadow among countless shadows, was locked into the ride that would never end. No way. On the storm-lashed coast of Oregon, whispers tell of a light that never dies. Perched upon jagged cliffs, a lantern hangs suspended, defying time itself. It once belonged to a woman who waited for her husband at sea. He never returned, but the lantern has never gone dark, burning each night like a beacon for those who have lost their way. Fishermen murmur that anyone who gazes upon its glow will hear a tender voice calling, luring them into the depths from which none ever return. One day, Endo. Margaret, a folklorist, walked through the skin-cutting cold of the Oregon coast. In her hand was a weathered leather journal, filled with fragments of legends she had gathered across the Pacific Northwest. But this time was different. No mere rumor or fireside tale. The lantern she sought, they whispered, still burned in truth. The path to the cliff twisted upward, the earth soft and slick with sea mist. Her boots sank into mud flecked with gravel, sliding with every step. Below, the ocean thundered against the rocks, its roar merging with the shriek of the wind. A grim symphony, like the ocean's own mournful breath. With every step, she felt herself drawn closer to something that did not belong to the world of the living. As the shadows thickened, Margaret saw it. Upon a sheer outcrop, untouched by human hand, a lantern burned. Its flame, golden and flickering, did not falter in the gale, as though shielded by an unseen hand. From afar, its glow was a lone, unblinking eye piercing the dark, at once inviting and threatening. Margaret froze, her skin rising in prickling waves. The impossibility of it all rattled her. No path led to that cliff. No hand could have placed the lantern there. Yet its light remained undeniable, brighter even, as her gaze fixed upon it. For an instant, she swore she saw a figure behind the flame, a slender woman's silhouette, her hair whipping wild in the wind. A coldness surged through Margaret, seeping from her knees to the soles of her feet. She drew a breath, but the air was too thick, too salt-heavy, as if the sea itself was swallowing her lungs. Her pulse hammered, and a single question carved itself into her mind. Was this legend come alive, or had she stepped across a threshold no human should ever cross? Beneath the cliff, the surf screamed white and merciless. Yet above that chaos, the lantern burned in calm defiance, untouched by nature's fury. Margaret opened her journal, but her pen trembled. The ink scrawled crooked as though the storm itself wrested the words from her hand. All else sank into shadow. Only the lantern's light remained, like the beating heart of night, a secret beacon summoning her closer. In that moment, Margaret knew research was no longer her only reason to go on. Another force, deeper and more perilous, had taken root within her. She had to see the lantern with her own eyes, and learn why it had never gone dark. Night along the Oregon coast was a suffocating shroud, a black veil without a single tear. The crash of waves rose from the abyss below, mingling with the lash of wind against the cliffs, as if thousands of unseen whips cracked in the dark. Yet through the frozen void, the lantern still burned, unmoved by storm, untouched by reason. Margaret stood transfixed, her eyes bound to its glow. She realized the light was no longer fixed. The lantern shifted slowly along the cliff's edge, each quivering shimmer like the fading imprint of invisible footsteps. No wind could carry a lantern in such a way. No rope could draw it forward. It moved of its own will. The sky, strangled by heavy cloud, gave no light of its own, yet the lantern cast a pallid trail across the coastal path. The glow wavered, brushing over slick moss and jagged stone, forming a fractured passage through the dark. Margaret found her feet already moving, unaware she had begun to follow. Each step sent loose rock tumbling into the chasm, their echoes joining the sea's roar, like the drumbeat of a funeral march from the deep. The lantern drifted farther, yet never vanished from sight. It kept its distance, always just beyond reach, close enough to lure, far enough to forbid. Its glow painted grotesque forms upon the cliff walls, long, grasping arms, twisted faces half buried in seaweed, all leaning toward her, aching to touch. The air grew colder. Mist clung to her clothes, seeping into her skin. Her steps grew heavy, but the compulsion within her only sharpened. In her chest, her heartbeat matched the lantern's wavering pulse, as though her body had been drawn into its breath. A violent wave crashed below, spraying white salt into the air. Through that drifting haze, Margaret glimpsed her. The slender figure of a woman, hair in wild disarray, dress pale and fluttering like a torn shroud. Margaret shut her eyes, but when she opened them, only the lantern remained, floating like a phantom that knew its way home. The coastal path narrowed, crumbling stone leaving barely a strip wide enough for a footfall. Beneath lay the black abyss, where waves struck the cliff face like 1,000 hands pounding at a wall. The lantern did not slow. It led on, patient, unyielding, drawing Margaret deeper into the dark that swallowed all things. She could no longer tell whether she heard the thunder of the sea or the blood rushing in her ears. Each time she faltered, the lantern flared violently, its glow throbbing like an enraged heart, before gliding forward again, forcing her to follow. For one terrifying instant, Margaret felt her body was no longer her own, dragged onward like driftwood in a whirlpool. At last, The lantern came to rest upon a jagged outcrop above the sea. It hung in the air. No rope, no chain, burning calm and defiant against the howling gale. Waves below burst into white foam, circling the cliff in a ritual rhythm. Margaret stopped, her body soaked through, yet her eyes could not break away from that light. In that moment she understood. The lantern did not guide towards safety. It led elsewhere, to a threshold between sea and night, a place where a person could be erased from the world, leaving not a single trace behind. On the outcrop that jutted into the sea, the lantern still burned, bright, suspended like a beating heart against the void. Margaret stood motionless, her body drenched in mist and salt spray, her eyes locked upon the shimmering flame. Around her, the world began to change. The roar of wind and wave ebbed away, replaced by something softer, an indistinct murmur rising from the depths of the ocean. At first the voice was fragile, no louder than breath. Then it swelled, resonant, filling the air. A melody slow and mournful, a funeral lullaby echoing through the night. Each note slid along Margaret's spine like a blade of ice, making her shiver, yet binding her inescapably. The song coiled around her mind, sweet in its hypnosis, dissolving the fragile line between reason and delirium. Below, the waves began to shift. Their rhythm aligned with the voice, as though the entire ocean had become its orchestra. Each surge, each shattering crash against the cliffs, deepened the lament, layering it with the resonance of 1,000 drowned throats. Margaret clutched her chest, her breath unsteady. She knew she was hearing something that did not belong to this world, yet her soul yearned for it. The song no longer surrounded her. It seemed to resound from within her ribcage, pulling her into its harmony. The fog thickening around the outcrop began to swirl, spinning in slow, spectral circles beneath the lantern's glow. In the mist, Margaret glimpsed drifting shapes, arms reaching upward, hair streaming and sodden, eyes wide and frantic in silent pleas. They dissolved into the melody, vanishing into the sorrowful chorus of the unseen. The lantern's flame pulsed with the music, flashing brighter with each rise of the voice. Every flicker felt like a signal, a heartbeat of the sea itself, seducing her soul. Margaret's feet moved toward the cliff's edge, step by step, though her mind screamed in resistance. The rock beneath her boots was slick, cold, treacherous, but she could not stop. When the song reached its crescendo, the heavens tore open in a slash of lightning. For an instant, the storm illuminated her. A woman's figure, slim, draped in white, her dark hair whipped into a tangle by the sea wind. She stood still amid the fog, facing Margaret. Her face was veiled in shadow, but her presence radiated an eternal grief. Margaret trembled, her eyes wide with horror. She knew she was beholding the living witness, or rather, the lingering soul, of the legend. The woman needed no gesture, no beckoning hand. The song was her summons, binding Margaret's heart, her feet, pulling her inch by inch toward the brink. A colossal wave rose, shattering into spray that mingled with the dirge. In that moment, Margaret felt herself poised on the threshold, between land and sea, life and death, flesh and phantom. The lantern still burned, unwavering, the single eye of the widow fixed upon her every step. The song was no longer music. It had become command, an invisible tether coiling around Margaret's soul, dragging her away from the world she once knew. The lantern trembled softly in the night. its glow no longer a simple flame, but a vein of molten blood coursing through the dark. The sea groaned below the cliff, each crashing wave a funeral drumbeat, carrying the dirge that filled the air. Margaret stood trembling, her eyes wide as the figure in the white dress emerged in sharp relief within the whirling fog. She stood upright, motionless, on the precipice where no human could stand. The long white dress, torn and stained with dark streaks, as if soaked in salt and blood from ages past, whipped violently in the wind. Black hair clung in tangled strands, yet could not veil the face that revealed itself. Pale as bone, its skin tinted with a deathly green, eyes hollow, yet glimmering as though reflecting the entire sea at night. Margaret's body locked in place, every muscle seized in terror. The song no longer rose from the ocean depths, but from the woman's own chest. Each note pulsed into the air, cracking the black sky to reveal ghastly streaks of pallid green light, like drowned corpses adrift beneath water. Shapes in the fog, arms, hair, faceless visages, floated toward her, winding around her like a living funeral shroud. Beside her, the lantern blazed brighter than ever. Its light clamped down on Margaret's gaze, forcing her to witness the spectacle. The woman tilted her head, lips parting, and from them unspooled a thin ribbon of black smoke. It curled into the wind, spilling downward across the cliffside, cloaking the very path Margaret had taken. Every escape was sealed. Only one way remained, forward toward the abyss. Fog swirled tighter around her, the salt-heavy stench choking her lungs. She staggered, desperate to turn back. But her feet were soldered to the cold stone. Each attempt to lift them was shredded by the rising song, cutting her will apart like fabric torn by a blade. The rhythm of the waves below fused perfectly with the hammer of her heart, until Margaret no longer felt she belonged to herself. The woman in white slowly raised her hand. The motion was delicate, almost tender, like an invitation, but it carried the weight of a command no mortal could resist. At once the lantern flared, flooding the cliff with a blinding gold as if a dead sun had erupted before her. In its glare, Margaret glimpsed another vision. Dozens, no, hundreds, of figures sinking into the water, their hands reaching in vain toward the shore, their eyes hollow, pleading, unredeemed. Shaken to her core, she could not look away. The lantern and the woman fused into a single hypnotic point, swallowing everything else. Wind shrieked, waves burst in white fury, but all was nothing more than accompaniment to the mournful hymn that would not end. In that moment, Margaret understood. She had been called, not by voice, but by soul. The woman needed no step forward, no touch of hand. The song and the light had done all. She simply stood there, a lighthouse of darkness, guiding the doomed into the sea. And Margaret, though she knew she was standing at a threshold from which no return was possible, could not resist. Neolao. Margaret stood at the cliff's edge, her breath ragged, mingling with the freezing mist. Below, the ocean yawned open like a colossal mouth, eager to devour any soul who strayed too near. Waves pounded in relentless fury, spraying white foam that rose like hundreds of grasping hands from the abyss. The woman in the white dress remained still, her hollow eyes blazing, locking onto Margaret's soul. The song endured, no longer music but a chain, an invisible binding that shackled her body. The lantern flared violently, its beam burning through her, scorching away the final flicker of resistance. Margaret felt her feet take one step, then another. The path back was gone. Each frozen breath coiled in her lungs, each slowing heartbeat fused with the rhythm of the sea. She knew that with another step, there would be no return. But her body no longer obeyed reason. She was nothing more than driftwood, carried on a current she could not fight. A violent gust swept over the cliff, carrying with it the stench of rotting seaweed. The heavens quaked with thunder, and in the lightning's flash Margaret saw faces, strangers she had never known, their eyes all the same. Empty, despairing, sinking slowly into the black sea. Their shapes drifted toward the woman in white, dissolving into the darkness that surrounded her, leaving only a muffled echo like cries silenced beneath water. The lantern shook violently, its flame surging upward into a pillar of fire against the storm. Its blaze was no warning. It was triumph, the sick exaltation of a ritual centuries old. Margaret stretched out her arms, entranced, and hurled herself into the light. In the moment her body tipped forward into the abyss, all sound ceased. Only the last echo of her heartbeat remained, absorbed into the unholy hymn. She plunged, the ocean slicing her skin like shards of glass. And before the darkness swallowed her whole, Margaret looked upward and saw the lantern, shrinking, vanishing into the storm above. The next morning the sea lay still, as though nothing had happened. An old fisherman, steering his boat toward open water, glanced up at the cliff. He froze. The lantern burned brighter than ever before, still alight even beneath the rising sun. Its glow seemed stronger now, fierce and unyielding, as though it had been fed a new soul. In the fishing village, a young girl who had once heard the legend saw it too, the flickering flame in the fog, whispering names of the lost. Any who lingered too long felt a faint, mournful song in the wind, soft yet unforgettable. No one ever found where Margaret had gone. Her weathered leather journal was never recovered. Only the lantern remained, burning brighter than ever, a testament that one more soul had joined the choir beneath the sea. And from that night onward, whoever gazed into its glow could never be certain they would return. The lantern, the immortal heart of the widow, would never go out. Niwa, awa.